morning. How many of folks were in my last session? Raise your hand. There'll be some duplication for the first maybe 10, 15 minutes, but then we'll get into the details. So they've asked me, because there's different folks in this session, to do that, so bear with me. And I'll tell one or two of the same stories. But what I want to do first is do another prayer, because it's going to set the context for today. It's the prayer of Archbishop Romero. Let me read this to you. It helps now and then to step back and take the long view. The kingdom is not only beyond our efforts, it's even beyond our vision. We accomplish in our lifetime only a tiny fraction of the magnificent enterprise that is God's work. Nothing we do is complete, which is another way of saying that the kingdom always lies beyond us. No statement says all that should be said. No prayer fully expresses our faith. No confession brings perfection. No pastoral visit brings wholeness. No program accomplishes the church's mission. No set of goals and objectives include everything. This is what we are about. We plant the seeds that one day will grow. We water seeds already planted, knowing that they hold future promise. We lay foundations that will need further development. We provide yeast that produces effects far beyond our capabilities. We cannot do everything, and there is a sense of liberation in realizing that. This enables us to do something, and to do it, though, very well. It may be incomplete, but it is a beginning, a step along the way, an opportunity for the Lord's grace to enter and do the rest. We may never see the full results of what we do, but that's the difference between the master builder and the worker. We are workers, not master builders, ministers, not messiahs. We are prophets of a future that is not our own. I'm going to give you some work to do today. In the context of that, it'll make a difference. You may not see it long term or for the foreseeable future, but you will see it. What I want to talk for most of my presentation, I'll go to probably, I think we said, what, 12:35, David, something like that on this watch, so a couple minutes later maybe then, because we started late. I will spend most of the time talking about responsibilities of the committee. What I want to start with, though, and forgive the repetition for those earlier, I want to spend the first 10 minutes or so about the focus of your work. Because if you go about this work and you're off focus, we got problems and it doesn't work. So the focus is important. And I'll say a little joke I said earlier, a true story, to talk about focus. A bishop friend of mine, Archbishop Kelley, retired bishop in Kansas City, Kansas, was going on a vacation with another bishop friend of his at one time. And they were on the plane going to this location. They were in plain clothes because they were on vacation. And after a few minutes in the air, the right engine got engulfed in 30, 40-foot high flames. Big deal. But the pilot was very calm. He said, "Folks, I know you're nervous. Just close the blinds. You won't have to see the flames. And besides, we have one good engine, and we can get to a nearby airport in about 10 minutes on one good engine. And besides, folks, we have two bishops on the plane." The lady behind them, not knowing they were in front of her, said to her friend kind of loudly, "I'd rather have two engines than one bishop." So I tell that story. What Archbishop Kelley said, it changed my whole perspective and focus. I want to have you of a different focus today, and that's what we're going to talk about here. What I want you to look at is stewardship. First, a couple things. My wife, Joan, and I try to live this out in our own lives. We give our time, talent, and treasure. Right now, I give about 7 hours a week in working with the homeless and administrative work, like board work is where my strength is. And my wife spends about 7, 8 hours a week singing. So we do time with our own gifts. We now are given about 10% of our income. To be specific, 10% of our income goes to church and charity. It didn't start that way because we had differences of opinion. I can't speak to your marriages, but we don't see everything eye to eye every single day. But we compromised at 2%, and then over some years went up to 10%. So we live this personally. Our diocese started doing stewardship work back in 1986. So it's something we believe in, been working on a long time. So it's something we're coming from. The focus of stewardship, as I said earlier today, it's based on gratitude. If your folks don't get gratitude, they will not get stewardship. It will not happen. So what we have to do is focus more and more on gratitude with our people so they can see what they're supposed to be doing. It's core to what we're about. So they got to focus on gratitude, and it's on conversion. I'll tell a story again of what I said earlier with the parish that's lived this kind of way of life. We have a number of parishes across the country we select as model stewardship parishes. We've picked 12 of those now in 12 years. But I would argue each diocese, including your own, probably has a top 10 list. I know I do in Charlotte. So a lot of parishes are models out there. I want to tell you this one story because it talks about conversion. This parish in Wichita has been doing stewardship for 30 years. They had change in the first 3 to 5, but it's been 30 years. And they have about 2,600 households. A lot of people. After living this true stewardship message I'm going to tell you to focus on here, their offertory is over $90,000 a week. That may not be big for you guys in Minnesota. It's big for us in North Carolina. And they have over 2,000 active volunteers, almost one per household. But I don't care about that. That's a byproduct. It's not core. It's a byproduct. What we're looking for in your parishes with this focus is symptoms on spiritual change. That people get more engaged in the church and more connected to Christ. And look for symptoms of that. In this parish, they average about 500 people a day at Mass. 500 people Monday through Friday. One of the ways they pray is adoration. They have about 700 people a week spend an hour in front of the Blessed Sacrament. They have 100 plus ministries. A number of those are ministries out to the community, not just for their own people. Literally dozens of small faith groups. When they do blood drives in the past, 200 people come to a blood drive. What they do is focus on vocation, not just lay vocation, but priest vocation. They've had 14 people leave that church to go to seminary in 28 years. Imagine if every parish had a person leave every other year to go to seminary. Think about that impact. They don't need all that money in volunteers. That's excess. So one of the things they did early on, they started, staffed, and ran on their own a medical clinic for the poor for the whole city downtown. I can't prove that spiritual change, but that's what we're looking for. Your parish needs to look for symptoms of spiritual change, not for money, volunteer, that's a byproduct. And it's about conversion. So if people don't get gratitude, they won't get stewardship. They don't get how blessed they are, they will not get gratitude. So you got to work on that. It's also intentional, planned, and proportionate giving. You need to focus on people doing all three of these things. You want a deliberate decision to live this life. They need to decide a percent of their income, whatever that is, I don't care, it's a spiritual decision, some number, because that's how we live our lives, and they got to decide some number of hours they give to church and charity. If people in your parish have no clue the percent they're giving and hours, they're missing this planned and proportionate part. So you want your people to look at that as planned proportionate giving. It's not about the budget. It's not about needs of the church. It's about the needs of the person to give thanks. Big focus. It's based on the fact that every single person in your church is gifted in some way. And your folks have no clue about that. One of the things you have to do, I'll talk about this later when I get to the examples, you got to spend some time every year with people getting connected to what their gifts are. You don't do that in your first couple of years as a committee, but within the first couple of years, you got to start focusing some on this with some people to help them because they're gifted and don't know it. They have no clue. There's also, it's part of our education, so what you want to have happen over time is all through your K and adult programming, stewardship should be highlighted as part of what you're doing. We have some work in our diocese around the country in schools where they have lesson plans that tie into your current lesson plans. You don't do additional work, you incorporate work. So they have lesson plans for science classes, for math classes, for geography classes that incorporate stewardship into the curriculum. It's woven into, it's not replaced of. And also work with your adults. How many different opportunities do you give your adults to connect to Jesus through doing spiritual educational activities? One of the ways the parish lives a lively parish life is to have more things for folks to learn and get connected to. 19 of the 36 parables in scriptures deal with time, possession, or money. Think about that. So it gives the pastor, and we've looked at the 3-year cycle of gospel readings. We have found a stewardship message every single month for 36 months. So the pastor can preach about it every single month, if not by name. It's about giving. I'm sorry, I'm not keeping up with this. Here I am. It's about giving the first fruits. Too many folks will give time if they have nothing else to do, and help with something. Or they God bless Christmas. There's so many folks that help with Christmas. That is not stewardship. Helping one time a year is not stewardship. It's a way of life. So we're looking for folks over time to give the first fruits. And some folks will give money but say, I can't afford to because I have so much going on in my life. It's about the first fruits, not what's left over. And it's time first spent in time with prayer. You want to encourage your people to spend time in prayer. I don't care if it's 5 minutes a day, but we find too many folks say they're too busy to pray. That's nuts. And it's messed up priorities. It doesn't have to be an hour a day. Most folks aren't going to do that, but have them spend some time praying every day. That's a clear focus. It's one of the principles, the core values of stewardship is connecting with God. You got to spend some time in prayer. And I said this earlier, but there's a bishop friend of mine who has his refrigerator, has a phrase on the refrigerator that says the main thing is to know the main thing and keep the main thing the main thing. The main thing is relationships, he says, with God and others. God first and then others. You got to spend time with prayer and then time spent with service to others. Stewardship's embrace all aspects of family and church. If you spend time visiting a sick uncle, a sick aunt, that's stewardship. If you spend time working with a home for the disabled in your ministry and not connected to the church, that's stewardship. If you coach a basketball team for your kids, that's stewardship. It's not just the church. The church is part of that, but if you spend time in other things, now we're going to encourage you to tie into your faith community and spend some of your time in the church for goodness sake, but also things you do in other capacities all fits into that as well. It's also about putting God first in our lives. One of the things we do, and I don't have it today and I'm not going to do it, but we have an exercise. We have people go back and look at their checkbooks or your computer and your calendar or your computer and find out, just look over the last 3 months. Review your checkbook the last few months or computer and ask yourself, where does God fit in my spending? Because your spending speaks to your priorities in life. Then look at your calendar the last 3 months. Where does God fit in my calendar? Because calendars and checkbooks don't lie. We ask folks to look at those and see where God fits in their checkbooks and their calendars because they tell us where we are with things. Stewardship is also about trust. You take a leap of faith to give 1%, 2%, 10% of your treasure. You take a leap to give 1 hour a week, 10 hours a week, 10 hours a month. There's a trust that if I give this money, if I give this time, I can still get and pay for the most important things in my life. People struggle with trust because they struggle with faith. But this involves a trust in God, and God comes through. Stewardship is proactive. As I said before, once you decide to do the stewardship work, then you got to start doing it. You don't commit 5 hours a month and say, I'll wait for someone to call me and do something. You seek out places to spend your time. If you're going to give 2%, 5% a year to church and charity, you have to decide through prayer what you're going to give to and how much. So it's proactive, and most of our giving is reactive. Reactive giving goes away with stewardship. It's not there anymore. And stewardship, again, it brings a sense of joy and fulfillment. If people are miserable doing this, they're missing the whole boat. Okay? There's a joy and fulfillment because they let go and let God. Now, someone says it's supposed to be me in this next picture with the glasses and all. Whatever it is. So the focus is in the right place. Now the question is, and here's what's key. How can we establish a parish environment that will encourage people to live stewardship as a way of life. I know you can't convert people. I know the Spirit does that, but you have great influence on the environment set up in your parish. And that's what this is all about with this committee. So, forming a committee. Typically, it's underneath the pastoral council. God bless finance councils. I've been on them. I've worked with them. It does not belong under that because it's not about needs of the church or budget. Those are disconnected from the stewardship effort. Those are accountability things later on throughout the year. It's about their need to give thanks. Responsibilities, you want to basically do three things in stewardship. Have a committee, do an annual stewardship effort, and then do awareness activities 12 months a year. I know in nature that the one-time thunderstorm doesn't make for growth, just like in doing a 1 or 2, 3 weekend effort. What makes for growth is the constant gentle rain. You need to have constant general awareness 12 months a year, and that's one of your jobs. And it typically has 5 or more members, sometimes more in a smaller community. I mean, something less in a smaller community, but 5 or more members, sometimes 10 or 15. What's the committee profile? You want someone who's spiritually motivated. You want someone whose primary motivation is people getting closer to Jesus. If their primary agenda is getting more money and volunteers, do not put them on the committee. That's off focus. We're looking for someone who's a steward. They give their money, they give their time and talent. I don't want a non-giver on this committee. It makes no sense. I want someone that has a vision of where this parish can be, like the example I gave in Wichita, 3, 4 years down the road. And I want folks to have qualities that ensure success. They're accountable, optimistic, persistent, creative, and willing to share their faith. Those are core things for the committee. Now that being said, let me start going through the responsibilities. There's 19 in your handout. For goodness sakes, do not try to do all 19 the first year. Makes no sense. Now maybe in 5 years you can be doing that, but not the first year. These are not in any particular order, but they're things. And there's some handouts you have in addition to some of these. You need to do a stewardship effort every single year, an annual effort. Why do you do it every single year? 4 reasons. 1, in order for people to get the message, like any education, you got to repeat the message on a regular basis. 2, it gives people a chance to take a next step in their stewardship life. If they're given 0.5% the first year in their time, and money may go to 1.5% the second year. They're going from 2 hours a month, could go to 4 hours a month. So they grow in their progression with their time, talent, and treasure to a certain point. There's also new people coming to the parish who haven't heard it. And I need to tell you what's going to happen the first couple years. People already given are going to give more. The non-givers take a while to get going, but at some point they will be giving. So you got to do that. Even in Wichita, after 30 years, 15% of the folks are not engaged and not giving. Now, 85% are. But you never get everybody. So the annual effort, there's an actual timetable there on your handout of what can take you 10 weeks to go from starting your process to completing it. I won't go through those handouts. They're there if you look at later. But it's a 10-week timetable, simple to follow, simple to do. That's one of the key things, is have the annual effort. The second is lay witnesses. Lay witnesses are core. There's probably a 10 or 12-page handout in your packet about that. Basically, people expect the priest to say spiritual things. When the lay people say that, it has impact. We've done some research on best practices in stewardship and found that one of the best practices is lay people telling their lay witness story. And there's a handout in there that says what they're supposed to cover in their 5 to 7 minutes. It gives them a chance to tell people a little bit about who they are, when they first heard the stewardship message, how their reaction was to that, hearing that message, what they did to live that message, and how it's impacted their life. There are 4 examples of talks in that handout. The 4th talk is way too long, but it gives you some of the points she made. She had to cut it back. I'd rather have to cut it down than to keep on adding more and more to it. But the lay witness is core when people tell their stories. One of my friends, a couple of friends, Dutch and Barbara Schultz, did a lot of lay witnessing across the whole country. He actually came from Minnesota. And when they tell their story, in most couples, one person's less likely to get engaged than the other one. We aren't equally spiritual at the same time in my experience for most of us. In this case, Barbara was kind of lacking. She said, we can't afford to do this kind of stuff. And they tell this in their lay witness. And Dutch said, we got to trust God. And she says, I don't trust God. So she was honest about it. But she said, I'll try this for 6 months so we can get this conversation over, and then we'll go back to the way we were in the 7th month. So Dutch took what he can got and ran with it. And 40 years later, it's changed their entire life. So when people tell that kind of story, their own story, it has impact. So lay witness is a core thing that goes on in this.